Hello everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. I thought I was recording for about 16 or 18 minutes. I've done a lot of things around pages and the rest. So let's just dial back in, I think in the previous video I talked about frames and how you can use frames, but if you really think about it, frames are like your artboard where you could sketch and write things, right? And there are different types of frames. So, for example, you could create a frame of iPhone 13, or you could just create a frame, of, iPhone Pro, whatever frame you want to, or even frame could be paper. So you could go to paper, A4, and all those things are in your frames, right? So in this video, I want to talk about auto layout. I want to talk about components and variants, right? So, and how could you use your auto layout to benefit whatever you're working on? So, let's say you have this frame already, right? So, let me create a frame. Or to create a frame around a certain object, you could just select that object, right click, and say frame selection, right? Sorry, right click and then say frame selection, right? So now once you have that frame, you could just let me paint this frame or fill this frame, for example, to give you an insight on what I'm talking about. So let's say you've created this frame and you want to write about us, right? So it doesn't follow the word, especially when the frame is clipped. It feels like there's no about us when in reality there is, right? So that's what auto layout is for, right? Is to help automatically lay out whatsoever you're working on, right? So if you really think about it, and the way to add an auto layout is there's an auto layout panel here. And the reason why there is no auto layout panel right now is because auto layout works on a frame. So auto layout is more or less like a frame on steroids, right? So to add that auto layout, you have to right click on this and frame a selection, right? Once you frame a selection, there is now this new auto layout panel that comes out. And the reason why there is a new batch here is because Figma just updated the way auto layout is, right? So if you click on the add button, it now adds an auto layout to this. And to kind of like showcase how it works, let's fill in the whole. Sorry, let's remove the auto layout grid. Let's fill in the whole auto layout. And now once you write things, it follows your layout, right? So we could call this home. And now for you inside the auto layout, right? And now inside the auto layout, there are different things in which you could do. This is alignment, right? So you can align it to the top center, you can align it to top right, you could align it to left center, you could align it to center. You could just do all of that, and you could add spacing within that auto layout. So let's say, for example, I have two things in this auto layout. The 10 pixels we have here, or the 10 pixels we have here, is talking about the spacing in between this work. So you could increase that, right? Or we also have this padding, horizontal and vertical padding, right? So if we have 10 here, it will give a horizontal, it will give a horizontal padding or vertical padding. And if we add 10 there, you give a vertical or horizontal padding based on what you want. And Figma has recently come up with all this independent, paddings that you could add within your work, right? So now let's say we don't want this, and we're working on our file. You can see that the only padding we have within it is just the ones on the top, which is 10, button 10, left and right 10, 10. So after we have that, let's now say we call this a button, right? And then we've resized it to 16 or so. Let's say, for example, we just have like 10 beside it, right? let's now say you have a client, and after you've created all these buttons within your file, right? Let's say you've created like 5 buttons within your file. This one say contact us. This one say about us. And this one say click me, for example. So, and that client comes back and say, hey, this white is a little bit too white. Can we redden it a little bit, or can we add a little bit of teal red to it to see how it works? And you can see that if you do not have what we call a component, which is what I'm going to show next, if you do not have a component, it will be hard for you to do all that for all of these layers. You have to independently go back and color them one by one, right? So in order to avoid that, in order to avoid you going back and coloring one by one, you create what's called a component. So a component is basically creating one master item that is editable, but it's not completely editable, right? So if let's say this button now is a button and you want to make it a component has to be a frame. You right click and then create a component, right? So this creates a component. And whenever I drag this out and let's say I have all this deleted, the main component will have a component icon up here, right? But the rest wouldn't because they're not the master component. And if you look at here, it's just like a triangle, but while this has like 4 squares in between it, right? So once you have this and you have like different duplicates of this, and you could change this to about house, and let's say about, and oh sorry, about, and this contact, it doesn't change the master component, right? And it doesn't change the properties of a said individual component. It only changed the content of the component. So now if you go back to your main component and say, hey, I want to change the painting of this, you could just you could really change it to whatever you want. But there is not one thing that you could do, right? You could take an individual component and give it your own styling, and you would say that within this file, you only want this text color to be red, if that makes sense. So that's what components are for. So let's say, for example, you want to create, let's say, different varieties of this component, right? Without needing to do it every time. An example of that is what I've done here. So I've had a button, and there's a button with an icon, right? And there's a button alone without an icon, right? And all of these are not a component yet, right? And you could make them a component. So let's now say, for example, I want to create this different types of components that has their own independent values, and you could change their values with time. And if you are asking me where I've gotten this button for, in the previous recording that I had that deleted, that I didn't record it, sorry, there's a plugin section and where you could manage your plugins. And then you could click on browse plugins in the community and add in plugins, right? So I'm not going to do that. Once you have a plugin, you're just going to install that plugin. So now let's now say you have your button like this. The only way to add the icon is just drag it in. As soon as there's an auto layout, it will recognize that plugin within it, and you can add more space into it if you want, but we're just going to go with the default 10. So now that you have your button with an icon, how do you create a component? How do you create a variety of a component, which is called variants here, within your file? So you select a specific file and you press Alt Command or Alt Control K if you're on Windows, but on Mac it's Alt Command K, and it will create a variant, or you select that variant, right click and say what? Create a variant. Create a component, sorry. Once you have this component, all in all, and the way you could create a variant is you select all, and there is a combined variant here for you, and it will come up as a button. How do you access this button files, right? You go to your component, you go to your assets, and it will showcase the kind of button you have within your file. And once you bring it in, you could change it to whatever you want. But now you might say, oh, hey, how do I now change it since the name is just a button and it doesn't seem to showcase a way in which you could change this? Now there are two ways in which you could change it. You could go to your file, right, into your asset and put the property that you want. Oh, sorry. So the way you could change this is by, first of all, removing the variance, right? The way you could remove the variance is you taking it out of the variant and selecting individual ones and saying the way it's button slash default, you could say button slash default, which is what you want to make your button default, right? You can now say button slash icon. You can now say this is button slash icon only. So what you're trying to tell the variant is that these are different sets of icons that I want you to treat differently. So now, for example, if someone selects all of this, they could create a variant that would now say, hey, if I go to my assets and I bring this button out, I could change this button from the property of default to icon only, and I could change the icon only to icon. And I could just change this to home, for example, without needing to change everything or start to hide this. I could just remove the icon and say by default, it will stay it's home, and I could add an icon to it. So that's the purpose of variants. So you can now say, oh, what's this property that's showing here? So that property is just to name your file very well. And in order to rename that property, just select the variant, go to the property section and change it to, something like type, for example. So what you're saying is once they bring this button out, they have to select the type of the button they want. And they could select icon only and icon and things like that. So now, with this variant, I want to showcase what you can do with it beyond just creating components, because you could create individual buttons with this kind of variant. So let's say, for example, bring this out, and the way to detach a component from its main property is by right clicking and saying detach instance. I can't find it yet. So once you create a detachable instance, you just duplicate this. And now let's say we want to create a hover button. Or this is not even a good analogy of what we want to do. So there are what we call toggles, right? You could say toggle on and off, right? So let's create a basic toggle. So what I normally used to do is I'll go to dribble and then I'll search for toggle. So this is just to get like concepts or ideas for your projects. Although, man, I've done a lot of toggles that I don't even need to go and say, hey, I'm looking for a toggle. So like, for example, now this is a toggle. Once you go to your Figma, right, we're going to create, let's say, a rectangle, right, or even a frame, right, and then we're going to draw our square, right? So now if you come back here, we'll see that we have a gray color and a brown color, which is blue in this case. So what we're going to do is we'll first of all color our main object as a little bit gray. And then what? We go to our border radius and increase our border radius to like something that is more than the size of the page. So let's say 50. It creates that smooth, round button for us. So now another thing we need is our ellipse within our work. So once we do that, we'll create an ellipse within our work and bring it to the edge. So now automatically this ellipse is a white color. What you could do to this ellipse to make it pop a little bit more is by adding a shadow to it. So we will first of all change this to white. That white makes sense, but we can also add a little bit of shadow. But I'm not gonna play with a little bit of shadow. And then, we want the shadow to be in the center of this ellipse. So we're going to remove the Y and we'll make sure that it's in the middle. And then we'll add the blur more to like 10, just to give it like this, pop more. And I'm sorry, we're going to increase it to like 10%, just to give it like this pop more thing, right? And then we'll duplicate this toggle, although this is a big toggle, for example. Well, once we duplicate it, we'll bring this to the side, and then we'll call this the brand color. Let's now say, yeah, our brand color in this case, we want it to be purple, right? So if you really look at it, there are two sets of toggles that you've created for yourself, right? And you've been able to kind of like play around with it. I don't know how to say this. So once we have this, we'll now call this toggle /off. All right. And then we'll call this toggle /on. Right. And then we'll create a variant from this, right? We can do that by pressing Alt Command K or Alt Control K if you're on Windows, then or right clicking to say create component. Where is it? So create a component. So once you select both of this, you could create a component out of it. But now you would say, oh, how do I animate this? When someone click this, it goes to this. When someone click that, it goes to this. There's a prototyping section of Figma, right? And then once you click on your prototype, right, this kind of like anchor shows within anything you do. So we would say when someone clicks this, it should show this, right? So once they click on the first button, it should change to the second toggle property, right? And we want the animation to be smart animate. And we want it to ease out, right? There are different properties you could do, ease out, slow, or we want it to slowly move or transition to that other one, right? And then we would say, okay, vice versa, when you click this too, it should slowly transition into the other property, and we want it to slowly animate that to other one, right? So how do you now showcase this? What I normally do is just, let's say we bring in our frame, right? And we're going to bring in a frame of iPhone or whatever it is, right? So now once we do that, we'll just go to our assets and bring the toggle in to our file, just so we could see how this will look like in the real world, right? So once we do that, we'll add a float point to this Figma and we'll change the prototype settings, and we'll choose the device to iPhone 13 mini. And then once we'll play this whole file by clicking on this play button just to see the interaction. The reason why we added a flow point is to tell them that we want the file to start from this file. So if we go back to our prototype, we'll see that we have a little bit toggle here. And then we can click into it and it slowly moves from that one, easily moves from that one to that other one. So what I'm doing now is I'm clicking in between them. So you could see a point where you create different animations, and these are what we call micro interactions, right? Where you create different animations just to kind of like balance in and out of what you're doing. An example of this micro interactions that you could create is, let's say for example, now you right click and you go to plugins, and then we bring in other icons here, right? So what we could do is create, let's say, with this spring little animation that Figma came up with, we could bring in a heart here, and then we'll say this heart that we just brought in. Let's go back to our design mode. Let's say this heart that we have just brought in, we could create a larger file for it, and then we'll duplicate this heart, right? So we would say that this should be, let's say a little bit of hash field, sorry, not stroke, but field. We want this to be a little bit hash field, and then we want this to be red color, because that's the color that is used to represent the heart shape or something, right? So if we have a little bit of red here, we could now create hearts. We could say heart slash active and heart slash default. So now we could create a component between this work where we'll create those components, right? And then what we'll do here is select both of the components and combine it as a variant, right? So we would now say, okay, within our prototype, when someone clicked that heart, it should switch back to this, right? But what we wanted to do is create a spring, right? So that spring, you can control that spring here. So let's move it up a little bit just to bounce. And then when someone comes back here, it should slowly push it back. So once we bring in the heart inside our work and we go back to our Figma prototype, we don't need to refresh the page to automatically do it. Once we click on this, it goes off. But once we click on it, it bounces back up. So those are the kind of like little micro interactions you could create within your Figma. But using the knowledge of our rectangle and things like that, I would like us to create a card of sorts within our Figma, right? So what I'm going to do now is go to, dribble for inspirations and go and search for cards. If we were to recreate this type of card within our Figma, what we'd need is a frame. That is this big chunk one, and an icon back, a text, and then a profile card with like a ring behind it. And then we need I think an edit icon, right? We need a name and the subject, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to use frame or F in our keyboard, and then we'll draw out the frame. Right now, we're not going to calculate anything or make sure that everything is perfect, but we're just creating a basic frame, right? So what we're now going to do is there's this eyedropper tool, and you can use, the shortcut tool called I in your keyboard to select a color that you want to pick within your design. So now once you've been able to select that color you want to pick from your design, you could give it a border radius just till we see that it fits like what we're trying to design. And after that, we'll then take our plugin, which is we're going to right click. We'll run this plugin called Further Icons just to bring in our icon, right? Back, I don't know what they're calling it here, but it's just back arrow, right? And then we'll bring it into our file. Take this Further Icon a little bit to the side. Or we should close it since we don't need it at this point, right? So we'll bring it to this side within our frame, right? So once we have that, we'll change the color from black to white, just like they have it on there. And then we'll take our text tool, and there's this new group they have on there, right? Bring it to the middle. New group sounds like it's 18, and then it's not regular, it's semi-bold. Use our eyedropper to pick the same color that is in the group, right? So I'm bringing that here, and I think it's the same color here, whatever. So once we've done that, we'll take our ellipse tool, which is a circle or O in your keyboard. We'll draw an ellipse here, right? So there will be two ellipses. There will be one that creates the middle file, and we'll duplicate that by pressing Command D or Control D within our keyboard if you're on Windows. We'll scale this up, right? We'll remove the fill and add a stroke of that same color that we have within our file. Once we've created that, you can see that it starts to look in shape, or it has started to take shape of what we want, right? Then we'll take our text tool. We could duplicate this, and then we'll change it to what? Group name. Bring it to the middle of our work. We'll change the color to white. Sure that everything is all right? So we'll duplicate this. The size, I think that's like 10. Then we'll say profile. We'll write what is in there. We'll center the text. Once we've centered the text, we'll bring it to the middle, right? Alignment center, sorry. Then we'll change the color of the text to fit what's in here. And so once you're able to do that, we'll see that slowly but surely we're recreating this. But now what I want to do is, instead of filling this with the whole plain thing, I would like to fill this with a color. So what we're going to do is we'll right click and go to our plugins, and like we said, we'll bring in either from Unsplash or Content Reel. But because I want to make this like a profile picture, I'm going to bring in a Content Reel, go to the images section, select this cycle, and then change it to one of those avatars that Content Reel has, right? So once I've brought this avatar in, I'm going to create a circle that represent this. But what I want to do is I want to make sure that that circle is animated, right? I want it to be, animated circle, just to demonstrate the whole component and variant thing we had initially. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring out a plugin, and then I'll bring out my feather icons, right? So within my feather icons, I'll look for the edit button, which is this, right? So what I'm now going to do within that button is make sure that the size fits, and then I'll create an auto layout within this, right? And give it a little bit of, I think 8 padding will do, or 6 padding will do, sorry. 6 padding will do. 8 is too much. 6 on both sides, 6 on the top and 6 on the bottom, right? So we'll change this to edit over edit / normal, and then what we're going to do is we're going to fill this with the brand color that we have initially, right? And we'll change that color to the main color in the square to white, just to match what we have going on. Change the whole border radius to fit in. And if you look at it, this thing inside the hole or the vector is not as we want, then we'll what? We can't reduce the vector, right? So what we're going to do is we'll increase the size of our padding. So let's say 10 from this side as well, and 10 from the bottom. So it will create a perfect circle, right? So what we're going to do is duplicate this. I've been saying, well, duplicate this, then change it edit / hover. So after we've done the hover, we'll just shape it like this, right? And we'll say that we'll create a component, and we'll make that component a variant. And then within our prototype, we'll select this to this. Not on tab, but while hovering, right? We want it to change to that, but we want to smart animate it, right? And we'll just say linear, right? Or slow, let's say, for example. And then we'll say, once you hover it, we want it to do that linear, and then we'll go to our assets, right, and bring this in to our file. So what we're saying is once we click on once we bring it to the hover, that's what we want it to do. Like we want it to kind of like switch to this. So if we now bring this to our mobile phone, right, we'll take all this out and we'll bring this to our mobile phone. And that's why I wanted it to be perfect, right? Once we bring this to our mobile phone and we'll go back to our Figma file here, it's kind of like here. So once we hover, it shows that, right? And once we take it out, it goes back to the normal. So I want to zoom our main Figma file. Once you come and hover on this, it just switches back to the other one. And once you go off, it switches back off. So it's one of those things that you could create just to make your work worth it, you know, like just a smooth sailing. And you could add some more properties to this. Like, okay, let's say if someone clicks this, you want them to navigate to another page. So I believe we've done an amazing one in this class. In the next class, I'll be talking about how you can create color styles. And then we'll wrap it up with this series and we'll be able to create an amazing project out of this. Thank you so much for watching my YouTube video and do have a good day.